Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome to Verde View. And this week we'll be talking to Gunnar Gundersen, who is going to be, he is a candidate for the 5th Congressional District for the Pacific Green Party here in Oregon. So welcome to the show, Gunnar.
Thank you.
And so I had some questions that I wanted to ask you. And what made you decide to join the Green Party? This is one of the two major parties. So how did that decision come about?
Well, I've been attracted to the Green Party for a long time, and for a while I was going back and forth between being registered as a Democrat and being unaffiliated. I'd register as Democrat for the primary so I could vote, and then go back to unaffiliated for the generals. But in the last presidential election, I was a Bernie supporter, and of course, as we all know, Bernie decided to basically to pull out at the convention or throw his support behind Hillary. And at that time, I registered for the Green Party because I thought it was the best alternative to a Democratic Party that I've kind of lost faith in myself. I think it's become a little bit, more than a little bit, that's an understatement, I think corrupted by major multinational corporation money. And I think the reason that I didn't support Hillary was because I saw her as just another corporate Democrat and not somebody that represented the ideals that I identify with. So the Green Party does represent the ideals that I do identify with, and I'm happy to hopefully have the opportunity to represent the Green Party in the election.
And the Green Party, because they do not have 5% registered voters,
right.
They don't have a primary. You get endorsed at a state convention that the Green Party has. And this year it's going to be in Eugene in June.
Right.
And you know, and I have to kind of agree with you about the Democratic Party because they've been down this path since about the 80s.
Right.
Instead of looking to labor and that kind of support from like working people, they've been looking for big money.
Right.
And so this is the end result of that journey, if you ask me, that you end up with people that are very much aligned with
Republicrats, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what made you though decide to run? I should say that you are the vice president of the Tokyo International University here in Salem.
That's correct.
And so what made you decide you wanted to be a candidate? And did being the vice president of the university help you in that program of seeing yourself in public service?
Well, that's a good question. I think it did probably influence me a bit. I've been an activist and involved in solidarity movements and political movements my whole adult life. I was in the first group of young people that could vote at the age of 18. And I got involved very much in the 1968 campaign when I was only 14, actually. And ended up supporting Eugene McCarthy, but at one point until he was assassinated, I was supporting Robert Kennedy. And actually got to know him when he was campaigning in the primary here, and he sort of took me under his wing and allowed me to become part of his campaign crew.
And this
Bobby Kennedy. And I was with him the whole time he was up here, and several days later he was assassinated at the Ambassador Hotel. So that experience influenced me a lot, I think. It didn't make me afraid. It made me feel more committed. You know, that it made me, on one level, probably angry that people like Bobby and Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers were being assassinated for standing up for what they thought was right. So that was a very formative experience for me, but that it grew out of, actually, if I tell a story, maybe it would reveal more about a little bit my motivation.
Well, go ahead. I mean, I think stories are a good way for people to kind of understand.
Well, I'm a working class kid from Southeast Portland. Grew up working poor. So as soon as I could, I started going to work. When I was 9 years old, I started working out in the fields in the summer to make money, not to go out and play. And I took it very seriously. And so I got exposed to being basically a field worker, working alongside migrant workers at a very young age. And I had a kind of seminal experience when I was 11 years old. This is kind of inside baseball about strawberry picking, but what they used to do, they'd take us out in the fields. And during the prime season, the rows of strawberry plants are packed full of strawberries, huge. And you can fill a crate if you work hard, in less than half an hour. So you could make, back in those days, you could make $10 a day, $12 a day. I did anyway. Some of the kids spent half the day eating strawberries and made $2 a day.
But they had plenty to eat.
So you can make real money because that would translate into, $50, $60 a week that I was making as a kid. But I'd been doing it for 2 years at that point. And we come on a day where we go out in the bus with the crew, and we're it's very early in the morning, and could get on the bus at 4:30 in the morning every day. And we go out in the field, and we get down, and we're starting to pick, and there aren't any strawberries. There's one here, and there's one 5 feet over there, and a couple more 10 feet down the row. And we started asking ourselves, what the hell's going on here? Because you make money based on the piece, right?
Right.
You're filling a basket that goes into a crate, and you're getting paid by the piece. So if there are no berries to pick, you're not making any money. You're just sitting out there in the sun
Or if they're
getting
so
burnt.
far apart, it's going to take you forever to make
Yeah,
it.
I mean, basically. So we started asking questions, and it was like, oh, it's okay, just keep picking, and the crew chief was being very vague about the situation. And finally, I got very upset, and I demanded that they tell me what was going on. And remember, I'm 11 years old. But I had moral indignation about this. And I was told that we were in a cleanup field, that this was a field that
Previously
had already been
picked.
picked over and over, because it's normal for them to get picked over and over. But it was sort of toward the end of the season, and this field basically had hardly anything left in it except these few strawberries here and there. So they were using this child labor, basically, and migrant labor, to go clean up this field. And so I protested, and I said, this is not fair. You need to take us to a field where we can actually earn some money during our labor. And they refused to. And so I called a strike. And I got everybody to walk out of the fields. And the only people who wouldn't were the migrant workers, because they were too scared. They were all, undocumented migrant workers, and a lot of women out there with their little kids, babies in crates tugging behind them. So I understood they were scared, but I got all the young people to march out, and we built a big bonfire by the bus, and we went on the bus and got our lunches, and we sat down, and did basically a sit-down strike. And they kept coming to me to appeal, please, let's not do this, and trying to negotiate with me. And I just insisted that this was fundamentally unfair. And we won. We won the strike. They told us, get on the bus, and they took us to another field that was replete with strawberries. And
Did they take the migrant workers with you?
yes, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They took everybody. I insisted.
Okay.
So I did that when I was 11. So I think that kind of put me on a path of being interested in workers' rights and immigrant rights and fundamental equity and fairness in society. And that's what piqued my interest in politics. And that's why I joined the Robert Kennedy campaign as a kid. Basically, I was a freshman in high school. And I've continued since then, the rest of my life. I've been involved in solidarity movements and political movements of various kinds. Sometimes I'm supporting candidates, sometimes it's not easy these days to find at least a national candidate that is worthy of support. I thought Bernie was. I regretted the fact that he decided to not fight at the convention. I wish that he had. I figured, I don't know what he is, 74 years old. Why not? Go ahead and fight it. He had his own reasons, I'm sure, but I was very disappointed that the system once again had won, and the person who had the stuff to really do the right thing was once again beat down and excluded, to the point where even his own people that had been invited to speak at the convention were turned away and locked out of the convention hall, which I thought was, again, fundamentally unfair and undemocratic.
Well, it seems like that WikiLeaks released some information that showed that the DNCC was favoring Clinton.
Yeah.
And, it's being presented as, a primary where you get to vote for your candidate, but they're trying to fix the deck, so to speak, so that their candidate wins. And, and they say, well, we're, not a public organization, we're private. Mm-hmm. So we can set the rules whichever way you want. But I think it presents them with a huge problem in perception, because people think, oh, okay, so you're going to tell me that I have a choice between these two candidates, but I can only really choose this one. Mm-hmm. And to me, that is very undemocratic.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that attracts me to running under the banner of the Pacific Green Party, because I don't think of it as potentially being a spoiler, as some people might characterize a candidacy like mine. I think it's a response to the fact that the Democratic Party has not been responsive to its members, and has actually kind of run away from most of the people that identify themselves as Democrats in the interest of getting the big money. And I think candidacies like mine can provide some external pressure to parties like the Democratic Party, so that they maybe start thinking twice. When the Bernie experience, I think, got the Democratic Party's attention, but you see them
doing the same
kind of
thing
going
now.
back to the same pattern again. It didn't last very long. The shock treatment didn't last very long.
Well, not only that, but I believe it was in Texas where they went after one of their own candidates.
Yes.
That was too progressive
Yes,
for their
they're doing
taste.
that. There are several cases of that around the country right now, and I fully expect something like that to happen to me.
Well, but they don't have the same ability to.
Because I'm not a Democrat.
Right.
Right.
But the Pacific Green Party, I have to admit that I'm a Pacific Green Party member, and I've been a Green Party member for over 20 years now. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that appeals to me is the platform, that I find myself very aligned to the platform.
Right.
And you don't necessarily win. Actually, the Green Party has won several elections, usually at the local level. Mm-hmm. But I actually worked for California State Assemblywoman in 1999 because she won a special election as a Green Party person. So
yeah, there are some in state legislatures around the country. Yeah.
And if you look back in our history, say about 100 years ago, there were 5 political parties in Congress.
Exactly.
So the Democrats and Republicans have kind of set up this system so that you have to choose Pepsi or Coke.
Right.
Ford or Chevy. Right. It's like you don't get any other choices.
Well, people forget that the Democratic Party, however you want to say it, started out as being a very small party, and the Republican Party too. I mean, they all started small at some point.
Right. And Lincoln was their second candidate to run for president.
Yeah.
So, there has been this gradual merging, and you kind of talked a little bit about this spoiler attitude.
Right.
Because you only have these 2 choices.
Right.
And, really, I guess I get to the point where if you don't vote for what you want, you'll never get it.
Exactly.
And so
I had an interesting conversation with somebody just yesterday, in fact, and we brought up, I don't remember who brought it up, but this topic of the spoiler came up. And I talked again about backing Bernie, but then when Bernie pulled out, I decided to put my support behind Jill Stein as to me, the candidate that identified more with the values that I identify with. And the person that I was talking with, in a joking way, said, "Traitor," because I didn't vote for Hillary. And that, it was said jokingly, but I remember during the campaign that a lot of people felt that way about those of us that had been supporting Bernie and then ended up supporting either Jill Stein or some other alternative. And some people that supported Bernie even ended up voting Republican, I think.
Or didn't vote.
Or didn't vote at all, which is really sad.
Yeah.
Certainly wasn't going to do that.
Well, so, but I mean, making this decision requires effort.
Yes.
And so now that you're in it, what issues do you really want to, be addressing? Because this is an opportunity to talk kind of outside the box and talk about issues that affect more people
Right.
than quite often. A lot of times, what I've noticed with the two political parties is, yeah, they'll really argue hard on things that really don't matter a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
But on the things that do matter, they're pretty much in alignment. When you come to budget issues for the most part,
Right.
and spending it on the military,
Yeah.
and so on.
Well, I think, to me, I'm interested in very fundamental issues. You asked me the question about how being the executive vice president of a university could influence me. And I think it has in many ways. And one way is that I've learned over the years that the infrastructure of what you're doing is the key to the success. You have to build an infrastructure, and infrastructure means you have to think very deeply about what are the foundational issues, what are the bases that you have to establish in order to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. And so I think that translates in politics into society, in things like the issues around climate change and natural resource management have to be, number one priority for us, because if we don't take care of that, everything else is going to be difficult or fall apart.
Irrelevant.
Right, irrelevant.
And we're leaving.
Where it's not about saving the earth, it's about saving us. The earth will abide. It'll
Right.
adapt. It might be warmer, it might be whatever, and certain species will disappear, but so will we. And
our
or
children and
at least our
grandchildren.
lifestyle and
Yeah.
and the way that we live in places that will be underwater eventually. So I think that's a key issue, and I think economic issues are extremely important. I think the working people in our country, what we call, I don't like these terms too much, the working class and the middle class.
But people that work for a living.
Yes, people that depend on that salary. I think we've been so undermined and so backed into a corner. Unions have been decimated. People haven't seen meaningful increases in their salaries for decades. Families struggle to send their kids to university to the point where, when I went to school, I got a $700 scholarship coming out of high school, and it paid for my whole year of college and some books, at Portland State University. Now, it's gotten ridiculous. And so that means opportunities have diminished. And so it's about economics, it's about access to education, about access to quality health care. These things are all connected with each other. Having a real minimum wage, $15 now, not $15 5 years from now. $15 an hour is basically an annual salary of around $36,000. That's pretty minimum for even a single person, but imagine a family with a couple kids. Rents and housing prices are going through the roof here in Oregon. How can people possibly afford paying $1,000, $1,500 a month in rent if they're making less than even if they were making $15 an hour, it'd be a struggle. So I think those economic issues are huge, and they're all related to equity and access issues, because if there isn't economic equity, there isn't social equity.
You know, we had a conversation and we were talking about the university.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked you about the cultural differences.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought you said something really interesting about where the United States is and where Japan is culturally when it comes to how we make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just going to mention that you were pointing out that the United States is one extreme where the individual makes the decisions. But like the Japanese, when they come over here, they get together as a group to decide what they're going to have to eat, or you know,
Very much.
how they're going to do things. And they're kind of at the opposite end. And the way I've looked at it during my lifetime is you have to have a balance between those two things, between the good of the society as a whole and for the individual themselves. And we've kind of gone to one extreme. And we need to be pulled back to where we're thinking about all of society, not just you as an individual, how well you're doing. And that to me is what makes a good society, is
Yeah,
people
what's
working
ironic
together.
about it is, you know, our parents' generation, you know, probably because they went through the Depression and probably because they went through a horrible experience in World War II, they got that. I mean, they sort of rekindled the spirit of community. And we were lucky, we benefited from that. And we grew up in communities where there was a collective understanding that what's good for one is good for all, and that there needs to be some equity and opportunity. So our generation very much benefited from that milieu that our parents created and our grandparents. But I think we have lost that. I think since Ronald Reagan, we've been going down this hill of increased emphasis on individualism, and it's often portrayed in individual rights, and it comes into the question about gun control, for example, and how nobody can tell anybody what they can or cannot do with their guns, and there's a certain illogical aspect to some of the arguments that they make, but it all rests on this individualism. Whereas, as you mentioned, the Japanese society, they more highly value collectivism. So it's almost impossible to make an individual decision in Japan. You just don't do it. That would be seen as being antisocial. Whereas in the United States, if you don't stand up for yourself and make your own decisions and act independently, then you're seen as weak and indecisive, and all sorts of negative characteristics are attached to being social and collectivist.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting too, because I worked for many years in corporate America, and basically you want people to cooperate with each other at work. You don't want them trying to compete against each other and trying to undermine other people to get ahead and things like that. I mean, it creates a horrible environment in the corporate world, and they realize that. But it doesn't see the cultural milieu that we're in seems to just really emphasize what you're talking about.
Well,
this
and I think it's
individualism.
fostered by a system that wants us to be at each other's throats or see each other as competitors rather than as collaborators, because it makes it easier for those in economic and political authority to manipulate us. And it makes it more difficult for us to come together with each other to fight for our common interests, because coming together and working in your common interest is seen as being collectivist and not individualistic. And so our culture, our advertising, our political messaging really emphasizes this individualism, even though, as you say, it's counterproductive to actually getting things done, which requires collaboration and compromise and understanding and listening to the other, and that's collectivism.
But that's how man has evolved.
Exactly. That's how we adapted.
Because we survived as a collective, either in a a small family group, or even mostly in
Right,
tribes,
mhm.
or then eventually into small towns and villages and
Right.
like that. But and like I look at it too, where I'm resting on the fact that society provided. Like my dad, for example, he was a Marine during World War II.
Mhm.
He got the GI Bill.
Mhm.
He was the first in his family to go to college.
There you go.
And that helped us all through our childhood
And all
to
that
do
was
much
set
better.
up because people with the right kind of vision, like Franklin Roosevelt, set up systems that said, if we don't start providing realistic opportunities to the masses of people, we're going to have violent struggle in this. And when the guy, I mean, the reality is, and maybe younger people don't know this, that when our parents came back from World War II, the guys that had served as soldiers, the government was afraid of them because you had a bunch of guys coming back that had learned
To kill.
and to fight for themselves. And that influenced the government decision making because they knew that people would take things into their own hands if they didn't provide opportunity, and that we benefited from that.
So where do you go from here?
Well, right now I'm in the early stages of the process. As you mentioned, I need to wait for the convention to become the official candidate. I've filed my candidacy with the party, so I've jumped through that hoop. A big challenge for me, as much as I don't like to admit it, is going to be fundraising, because primarily I'm running against Kurt Schrader, who's the Democrat, and he's amassed a war chest of about $4 million already, and about 80% of the funding that he's received has come from large multinational corporations who aren't even in Oregon, about 80% from outside of Oregon, and even a larger percentage from outside of the district. So I don't know who he represents. If you look at where he gets his money, it's not from Oregonians, and it's not from people in his district, and it's not from the working people. It's from Exxon and Chevron and Monsanto and Pfizer and United Healthcare. He sits on the energy committee, so the energy companies want to keep him happy. So I don't know where he's coming from in terms of being a representative of the people, but it's certainly pretty clear that he's become pretty successful at being the representative of multinational corporations.
So, Gunnar, what can people do if they're interested in finding out more about your campaign?
Well, as I've said, I'm in the beginning stages. I do have a Facebook page, so Gunnar for Congress on Facebook. If you search in the Facebook search engine, it'll pop up. I'm getting my website established. Probably by the end of this month, I'll have a website up and running. I already have the domain name. It's gunnarforcongress.com. If people are interested in contacting me directly, my email is gunnar29@comcast.net.
That's pretty easy. We'll repeat that during the credits.
And my phone number, my cell phone number is 798-0345.
And that's in the 503 area.
In the 503 area. And I don't mind being contacted directly if people are interested in helping out. I'm going to need a lot of help. I'm going to need volunteers to knock on doors and put up signs. This is a very large district. It runs all the way from the Cascade Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. It incorporates Clackamas County, Marion County, Polk County, Benton County, Lincoln County, and Tillamook County. So a very diverse, large area, which makes it difficult to campaign when you have limited resources, but I'm going to give it my best shot.
Well, Gunnar, I want to thank you for coming in today and talking about your candidacy, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you for the opportunity, Ken.
And join us next time.